All right, so hello and welcome to this interview series ahead of Data Center World on the 6th and 7th of March at Excel London. I'm Stuart Crowley, the editor of Techarati, and today my guest is Courtney Popp. She is the Director of Education Programs at Infrastructure Masons. Courtney is set to appear at Data Center World in March, but today we're going to talk about 3 significant years of Courtney's life that have shaped her life and career. So welcome to this interview series, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Stuart. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So, what have you chosen as your first year of your life that's kind of shaped it?
That's shaped my career. The first year that I chose was 2010.
Perfect. And why have you chosen that year?
That's the year that I graduated from college. I had a little bit of a broken path, winding path to get to graduation day. I initially started college in 2002, schedule according to graduation ages in the US, and realized that I was not quite prepared. And so I took a semester off for 5 years and then went back. Graduated with a particular career path in mind. I was really interested in becoming a professor of philosophy. So my degree is in philosophy, and learned very quickly as I went into graduate school that that was not actually a career path that I wanted to follow. And so ended up just trying to find any job that would keep the bills paid. And that was how I landed what I call my first big girl job at Cisco.
What were you doing at Cisco?
I was a assistant program manager in their customer briefing center outside of Washington, D.C.
How would you say your kind of career or your educational career in philosophy? How different is that from what you're doing now?
It's honestly not that different, realistically. The thing that I always say about philosophy degrees in particular is that we're not necessarily being taught just to sit on a rock and pontificate in a toga, although that is a really fun joke in my family. We do learn how to think about things a little more differently to a lot of other people who are in maybe some of the harder science disciplines. So we look at problems and can come up with different, not more creative, but differently creative solutions to those problems. And so in program management and project management in particular, being able to take information from all kinds of different sources and then synthesize that information into one cogent overarching theory is actually very, very useful for the kind of work that I'm doing today in education and in workforce development.
So whilst the degree choice might not have entirely aligned with your kind of career path as it stands, do you regret choosing philosophy as a degree?
Absolutely not. No. I regret my student loans, but that is a uniquely American problem. But the degree itself, absolutely not. I had an amazing 3.5-year career in school, just learning about really cool things and having really cool conversations with people who were not afraid to ask questions. They were not afraid to give answers. And they weren't afraid to say, I don't know. That has actually been my biggest, I think, one of my biggest career strengths is that I am not afraid to say, I don't know. I think a lot of people can fall into the trap of thinking that that makes them look less informed, but realistically, I think that it's human to not know the answer to every question, and so we tend to shy away, I think, from saying that we don't know the answer. But we don't so many times. And I think that really instilled in me a confidence with saying, hey, you know what? I'm not sure about that right now, but I'll figure it out and I'll get back to you.
In the data center industry, what would you say is perhaps the biggest unanswered question right now, where perhaps the best answer would be, I don't know?
So I think the biggest answer is right around what I do. The biggest question is right around what I do. We know from the Uptime Institute surveys that we're looking at a jobs gap of about 300,000 people by the time that data center world happens. 300,000 open jobs that need to be filled, and we don't have the talent to fill them, and that is very, very daunting. It means that people who may want to retire are not going to be able to because they don't know for sure where their backfill is coming from. And I think that there's a lot of dedication in the employees in this space. And so we're seeing a continually aging workforce and not a lot of work being done on the lower end of the career pathway, the lower end of the career ladder, if you will. And so what we're trying to do at Infrastructure Masons is generate multiple different answers to that question of where do we find 300,000 people globally to come into our industry from either other spaces or as their first job. How do we find them, and what do we do to get our message out there? That's really what iMasons is looking to try to solve in multiple different ways.
Critical, isn't it?
Yes.
And we've seen well, I kind of love and hate the term, but the silver tsunami sort of term that's been thrown around. But that's a very critical kind of thing that I would say almost gets overshadowed by the discussion of sustainability. But it all links in together, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, that is a form of sustainability. If you don't have workforce to maintain your data center, it's not going to stay online. So that is in and of itself its own kind of sustainability.
What's your second year?
My second year is 2015. And I chose that one because as you may remember, I mentioned that I was just outside of Washington, D.C., and I relocated to Denver, Colorado in 2014. And I really had a very immense amount of privilege at that time of not needing to immediately find a job. I was really focusing on in my job search out in Denver on kind of the type of work that I wanted to do and what I needed from a working environment. It was a really nice luxury to have. So I took a role that at the time sounded like it was going to be a really good fit for the kind of work I wanted to do, the space where I would be making an impact. And unfortunately, the day-to-day realities of that job and the fact that it was effectively a 50% pay cut from my previous role really just left me burnt out and desperate to get away from what I was working in on a day-to-day basis. And so I used that discomfort to light a fire under a job search, a second job search, where again, I still had those really clear, these are the kinds of things that I wanted to do. And so I started really looking for other roles. And this ended up with me going into a job interview with no clear picture from the job description or really the description of the system that it was going to be in. Really no idea of what this job was. And I absolutely bombed that interview. I did so poorly. I went home, I felt really dejected because the interviewers were very nice and it seemed like the kind of security and the kind of work that I was interested in doing, but they didn't do a great job of articulating it. I think part of that is because it was a new position that they had just created, so they didn't quite know what they were looking for out of it. And I thought that I had completely bombed that interview, but I ended up receiving and accepting that role. And this led to me working for the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment for 7 years. I went through 3 promotions with CDLE and learned everything, not everything, but a lot of things that there are to know about the workforce development system in the United States, and then just by extension, the kinds of systems that exist elsewhere in the world. And it was really eye-opening. I was technically at unemployment insurance through the pandemic, which was in itself its own eye-opening experience. So it was just really a horrible interview for a job I didn't understand, where I ended up really doing well and learning the roles and learning the systems and really being given a lot of independence and freedom to generate my own solutions to problems and come up with just really, really great things that Colorado is still implementing to this day.
Oh, fantastic. What would you say is what are the key achievements that you might be most proud of? Maybe one of the projects that you worked on.
A lot of it has to do with a particular program that I was working on throughout the last few years of my career. And this one has to do with a program that is aimed toward getting folks who are on unemployment insurance benefits engaged back in the workforce much sooner than before their benefits run out, right? And that's critical for the solvency of the unemployment insurance benefits system, at least in the United States, just based on how it's funded. So we wanted to really target people who were laid off through no fault of their own, because that's how unemployment insurance works in the US. They were laid off through no fault of their own from an industry that is in decline, either because of regional demand or trade competition or other kinds of things that would lead to this kind of layoff for this employee. And so these claimants for unemployment insurance benefits, they have been working recently, they have work experience, they know how to hold a job. And so our program was aimed at identifying these folks based on an algorithm that analyzed all of their metrics and determined who was most likely to use up all of their unemployment insurance benefits, and then targeting them very early to give them an interaction with the workforce development system in our state. So we would have them in for an appointment, and we would have them in to talk to them about their options, transferable skills, other kinds of careers that they could pivot into, and potentially secure training for them through other programs that we work with. So this program is federally mandated, but one of the things that Colorado was doing that was a little bit behind the times, keep in mind I was here until 2022. So it was very behind the times. It was all based on physical paperwork. It was not electronic. The customers couldn't self-schedule their appointments. For a long time, we were scheduling the appointment for the claimant, as opposed to having them schedule it at a time that worked for them. And so I was able, through taking ownership of the program, to build in a lot of modernizations to the system, moving all of our appointments to virtual appointments, because it really doesn't matter where you're meeting with a person as long as you're having that conversation. Moving our model for scheduling to a self-scheduling model where the claimant is able to say, hey, I actually have a life and I need to work around that. Getting the letter translated into Spanish and all of the communications translated into Spanish, which was our second highest language in the state, was really critical and actually took a very long time to do. And then just really building all of those modernizations into the system to create something that actually worked for the claimants we were really trying to serve. And it did a lot to increase diversity. It did a lot to make sure that our program actually represented the people in the state of Colorado. I'm really proud of that achievement and getting all of that through the door.
What are the sort of things that you've taken from learning about the human condition and applying digitalization? How are you applying that to now your role at Infrastructure Masons in the data center industry?
In many different ways, realistically. So I think ultimately a program that serves to benefit a person needs to be workable for a human. We, as a tech-heavy space and as a space that is very, very strongly aligned to other much more technologically advanced industries like AI, we tend to ignore the human part of the equation. And so I'm really trying to build in the way that humans work, the way that humans learn, into some of that. And so we're working at Infrastructure Masons to take some of the mystery out of data centers. This is part of our kind of massive education campaigns that we're really doing to help people understand, what is a data center? Why does it matter? And why does physical space have to exist for information? Like, why is that needed, right? So for example, if I'm just speaking to you in a person-to-person, face-to-face way, I don't need to store our conversation anywhere. I don't need to physically take my speech and put it in a bottle. And so it can be difficult to understand how that physical space is necessary to store all of this data that we're creating every day and every time we scroll through literally anything on any device. And so I think people aren't recognizing the magnitude of the way that our human behavior is shaping our infrastructure environment and the kinds of needs that we're going to have as our demand for more and more technological solutions to very human problems grows. It's almost a vicious cycle, but I think that we can make it virtuous by really working in human-centric solutions to some of these problems. So we're working with, at Infrastructure Masons, we're working with several organizations that are trying to help really close the gap in terms of the perception of the data center space, and also the knowledge of the data center space, awareness of what a data center is and does. So we have multiple ways that we're working to help the public become aware of digital infrastructure, how important it is, and really how stable it is as a career field. We see a lot of panic, I think, in the media about the way that AI is coming for your job, and I mean, it probably is. And the way that you can future-proof your career is to work in digital infrastructure, because every job that AI comes for means that there needs to be more digital infrastructure to support it. I think it is genuinely the next everyone needs a plumber.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the media, and it's interesting because I've had many conversations, I guess, given my position in the industry, journalism, media, news, and interviews like this. How important do you feel it is the media in driving that positive public perception of the data centers? And how can we as an industry work better with the media as well to drive those public perceptions more positively?
I think that's a really great question, and I haven't thought about this too much. My expertise is not in media relations, so this is outside of my scope, but I see the media really as an opportunity for digital infrastructure. I think that we don't have a major media portrayal of what a data center is. I think probably the best one that I've ever found is the show Person of Interest. That show was honestly a very good show, and it's about an AI. But ultimately, that show is about AI and is about the ways that humans interact with AI, and not about the physical infrastructure beneath it. And so I think that one of the ways that media can work with or against us is by portraying data centers as more or less or of what they are. Realistically, a data center coming into a community, and I live in Northern Virginia, so I hear a lot of the media buzz around data centers coming into the community, right? And, certain movie stars who are living in the area are protesting at town council meetings about they don't want a data center coming in, and the media covers that significantly. But one thing that they haven't covered is that the reason the movie star does not want a data center in his space is because he wants to continue being able to go fox hunting in the area. And so I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the stories are told in a not only factual, but an entirely factual way, where the entire story is told, because it was very hard to find that information. And the only reason that I know it is because I know someone who was at that town council meeting and actually spoke to the movie star about his reasoning. So it's not something that you would see in the media or very widely portrayed. I think that we need to make sure that the economic impacts of data centers. There was a really great report put out by the Data Center Coalition recently about 3 particular data center markets and the ways that they are influencing the economy beyond just the jobs that they provide and the space that they use. Digital infrastructure is the second largest jobs multiplier industry in the United States. And that means that for every 1 job in the United States that is created by a data center, an additional 11 jobs are created outside the data center as a direct result of the 1 job that was caused by the data center. So I think that that's hugely powerful, and it's not something that's covered enough. I also think that there's a space for the government, really, and this is really more government than the media, but I think that the government needs to do a much better job of communicating what digital infrastructure is, especially in the United States. We are not our own industry. We are lumped under tech, right? And so it's very difficult to get real data about digital infrastructure in the US because it all just falls under this occupation and industry rating of technology, which is not necessarily helpful when you're trying to tease out information about what we are as an industry and what we do. So I think that the media is to a certain extent another branch of government, at least here in the US. And I think that it's really critical to make sure that everybody that's a player in all of this is telling the right stories and the whole stories.
Absolutely. Probably a long way to go on that in terms of ensuring that a journalist can be balanced. I come from that very similar experience of, how much can we be balanced when how much information can we actually gather in a short amount of time? But big conversation to be had. But I think it's so important for the data center industry to continue that fight for greater balance.
Sorry, I was interrupting you, but I also want to point out that I think it's really difficult for the two groups that I mentioned, the media and the government, to accurately tell these stories, primarily because they're not educated in this space. They don't have the technical knowledge of the technology and the impacts that it has on. They don't have that education incumbent in them. And so when a journalist goes to write a story about digital infrastructure, they're relying on the voices that they're hearing and the sources that they're seeing. Similarly, with the government, they're relying on the experts and the policy people and the lobbyists and the campaigners and the community activists who and I think that really it's difficult, I think, as a journalist to really tell that story without having all of that knowledge. And so I think one of the things that I've seen a recent surge in is the data center industry telling its own story. And really making sure that the voice from the industry, from the educated and knowledgeable individuals about this particular industry are heard and represented in the sources that are available to journalists and to government. And so that's something that I know that Data Center Coalition is doing a really, really great job of. I think that 7x24 really has a hand in that space. And iMasons as well has a lot of really interesting resources that are available. And we're working to continue to compile those. So I think that it's very difficult, like I said, to tell the story without knowing all of the underpinnings. And so as someone who works in this space, who also doesn't have a background in it, I couldn't walk into a data center and tell you, looking at a rack, like that's a server, that's the router, that's a switch. I couldn't do that. I don't have the technical knowledge for that, but I can tell you about the power of the industry itself.
Moving on to the final year that you've chosen, I think it all relates to this final underpinning year.
Yeah, for sure. So that last year is last year, 2022. I finished my master's degree in 2022. I had actually finished it before, but 2022 was my official graduation date. And I made the decision to move back to the DC area from Denver. So packed up all my stuff and my dog and my plants and drove across the country again with everything that I owned. And in looking for a role that would support me moving out of state, I stumbled across Infrastructure Masons. And it was really an interesting fit when I saw the job description, because they were looking for someone who had a background in workforce development, which I had spent 7 years doing. But I also had the education component, because I'd spent a couple of years in a STEM education nonprofit. And then before that, I had been at Cisco. So I have a little bit of background in technology. Again, not highly technical, but a little bit. I osmosed some things. And so I had sort of all three pieces that came together to make me really successful in this role. And I think from the get-go, when I started interviewing and speaking to my, current leadership at iMasons, I just knew that it was the right fit. It was a fully remote position. They didn't care where I worked from. They didn't care, if I was on East Coast time or West Coast time. And it was work that I was going to be able to feel really good about at the end of the day. I was going to be able to close my computer, realize that I hadn't cried on a meeting for a whole day, which after working for unemployment insurance during the pandemic, you better believe it, that was a nice break. And just having an impact in a global space where, I had come from a space where I was making an impact on an individual level at before I came to the state of Colorado, and then I was having an impact on the state level at the state of Colorado, and then I'm having this global impact now. So I've really not only expanded my skills and my understanding of the different concepts that I'm working with, but I've also expanded the scope of my impact, which to me is really important. I'm the kind of person who likes to close up my day knowing that I can put my initials on it and say I made a difference in a life somewhere. And feeling like that helps me get up the next morning and continue to do the work that I do.
Fantastic. What sort of impact do you feel like you've experienced so far, with changing people's lives? What sort of things would you say as examples?
I think probably the biggest example at Infrastructure Masons is our scholarship program. We award hundreds of scholarships a year to students all over the world, and our scholarships have ranged from folks who are already employed in digital infrastructure to folks who do not have a job, who are looking to potentially transition out of the military, or people who are looking for their first role. And one of the things that I really love seeing is all of our students from Africa. We have a lot of students who are from the Lagos area, from Johannesburg and other markets that are really starting to come into the foreground of importance in terms of the digital infrastructure space in the continent of Africa. And so really seeing folks who are coming from a place where they are limited in the options that they have, and being able to support them with a scholarship toward a quick certification that is industry recognized, that is going to move them into a position at a data center that is going to be able to help support them and their families moving forward, I think is a really, really significant impact. We had one scholarship student who he applied and he lives in Lagos. And when I interviewed him about his receipt of the scholarship, I asked him, how did you find us? And he said that he, just as an individual, is very, very passionate about education. And he was searching for scholarships because he believes that scholarships are the way to close the gap in economic opportunity. And so he was researching scholarships for someone else and found the iMason scholarship, applied for it, was awarded it, and now he was talking to me. And I have been able, through all of the applications since he applied, to see the word of mouth network that, because of this one individual and his passion for education and for scholarships supporting education and for that kind of economic mobility that creates, I've seen that word of mouth flow through some of the other scholarship applications that we have received and awarded through the following year. It's been really, really great to see.
That's fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
So I mean, you have this experience where you're really talking to people and
Yes.
getting to hear the voices that I don't think we all have the privilege of having. I would say it's a privilege because we're telling these stories, and we want to tell these stories from the ground, and to show the real human impact of what you're doing, what the data center industry is doing as well.
Yes.
So I guess this could be like the easiest question to answer or the hardest. But what would you say to someone that has maybe no idea about the data center industry? How would you encourage them to consider it as a viable career path?
It was funny. I was just recently in Denver, and for the International Facilities Management Association conference, and we partner with them every year to offer scholarships to some of their facility managers. And the two ladies that we were honored to support this year, they were completely unaware of data centers and what a data center could mean for their facilities management career. And I talked to both of them, and they both said, but I can't code. I don't know anything about coding. And I said, hey, have you ever switched on the internet at your house? Like, have you ever plugged all of that stuff in? And they said, yeah, I've done that. I said, you can work in a data center. Like, as a facility manager, you probably won't be doing that work, but if you can plug things in, you can work in a data center. And now they both are working on facilities management certifications through DCD Academy, and they are really, really interested in internships in the industry. And so they came around with just the, hey, a data center is a facility. We want you to be aware of it. And it was not only them, but it was the people sitting around me, because I have kind of a loud voice. And so people heard me talking. And it was really, really great to just see, again, these two individuals who had never considered digital infrastructure as a career, now thinking about, okay, I don't have to go to an office building. I can do something like a data center if I wanted to, and really giving them that opportunity to think outside of the box of just the box of a building, right? I think that's kind of how I would describe it. You don't have to know how to code. Knowing how to code is fun, and you may use it in your career in a data center, but if you don't know how to code, there are hundreds of other opportunities for you within the space. If you have plugged in your home internet and gotten it working, you can work in a data center.
So now thinking just ahead to 2024, when you'll be speaking at Data Center World, mm-hmm. What's one of the key things that you hope to really get out of that event when you're speaking to people and sharing your thoughts around the data center industry? What's something that you're really looking forward to sharing at that event?
So it's going to have to be the thing that I saved for last, and that is the curriculum that iMasons, Infrastructure Masons, is currently developing with a nonprofit partner named Jason Learning. Jason Learning is a STEM education nonprofit organization. They have been in the space for 35 years. They have a reach of 6 million students worldwide. And we are partnering with them and several partner companies to create a curriculum that is specific to digital infrastructure. So they are going to be learning, these students will be learning things about how do we select a site for a data center? What are the sustainability concerns around selecting a site for a data center? What kinds of public interest and government policy advocacy concerns do we have with data center development? How do you future-proof a data center for AI? And how do you build a data center now for what a data center is going to need to be in 10, 15, 20 years? And then also, how are we cooling a data center? What kinds of innovations are going on that way? Those are the modules that we're working on right now. And so when I say module, that's think of chapter of a textbook. And so this is going to be launching by Data Center Day, which is in March of 2024. So it all lines up rather perfectly. And this curriculum, and as well as the rest of the amazing Jason Learning content, is available to be purchased by a digital infrastructure partner who wants to help with public perception at either in a site where they exist or a site that they plan to build. They can purchase this curriculum for students in that area. And so we're really excited to be able to deliver that opportunity, to be able to work with Jason Learning. We have a contract in place where there will be a discounted rate that's available to iMasons partner companies. So it's a really, really good opportunity to be able to share the digital infrastructure world as well as just STEM in general with students globally. And this is all software. It's a SaaS platform. So it's available to anybody with a device that can connect to the internet. It's really, really powerful.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask, given the stakeholders that often come to Data Center World, you got end users, but also data center vendors. I was going to ask how can they get involved with this? And I think you've mostly answered the question, but is there any other ways that that they can get involved in perhaps maybe shaping the curriculum or giving an experience to the students that maybe they could touch or feel sort of or experience some of the product? I'm not sure, but any
Yes, there are several ways. The first is just to adopt a module, one of the chapters. We have opportunities available for iMason's partner companies to participate in adopting a module. Each one of the modules that I discussed is being developed in partnership with an iMason's partner company. Those companies are able to put their logo, their staff, and their story really into the content that will teach kids about data centers in general, but then also tell the story of their company. It's a really powerful opportunity. Their logo is going to be all over it. And there will be a role model video, which is a staff member from the company who is really speaking about who they are, why they work in digital infrastructure, and why it's so exciting for them, because it's really a kind of a career exploration curriculum while learning things like heat transfer and fluid dynamics and all of the different kind of engineering pieces that go along with this. So that is one option that is available to iMason partner companies. The second way is if we're looking for a little bit of a smaller investment, to host a design and pitch challenge. So the nonprofit that's developing this curriculum also can create a design and pitch challenge specifically for a group of students at a school or worldwide, where students are given a problem that they would like to have solved. That could just be an interesting thought experiment, or it could be actually something that you're looking to have solved at your company. And the students will have to research the problem, create a solution, and then pitch that solution. The company gets to choose the winners, and then the winners can have all kinds of prizes based on what the company wants to offer for that, whether it be a scholarship or a whole bunch of tech or gift cards to iTunes the kids seem to really like. So those are all options. And then the third option is just to purchase the curriculum for either from either an individual student or for a whole school system. If you or your company are interested in doing that, that is something that is absolutely available, and I'm happy to talk to anybody at any level who is interested in receiving that kind of a benefit. We have discounts available on that cost.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Courtney. Well, I'm excited to have you at the event and to learn more about this ourselves as well. So thank you so much.
Yes, of course. I'm thrilled to be part of this.